Hi, I'm Sarah Hill, the CEO and co-founder of Bookstr. We are here today with Julia Samuel. She is the author of Grief Works. Julia, first of all, happy Pub Day.
Thank you. Very exciting to be here and very exciting to have Pub Day.
We are very excited to have you. And just so you guys know, this book is in stores today and online. There's a link in the comments. And speaking of comments, you can go ahead and get your questions in the comments and we will send them to Julia as soon as I get them here. So go ahead and start writing them and we will get you guys an answer. Julia, this is a beautiful, beautiful book.
Oh, thank you.
It's really gorgeous. I can tell that obviously a lot of years went into the literature that's in here, and you've written in a very beautiful way. Can you tell me a little bit, just so our audience can familiarize themselves with you, tell me a little bit about yourself and how did you get started on learning about grief?
So I'm a psychotherapist and I specialize in grief, and really my first proper job was in a hospital in London, and I supported families when a child dies and when a baby dies. And I did that for 22 years, and early on in that I helped start a charity called Child Bereavement UK. And really all my learning comes from bereaved families. So from what all my clients have told me over the years, I've used to expand my knowledge of the needs of bereaved families, individuals or families. And I wrote the book because I was angry. In the end, I got incredibly frustrated that everybody that came through my door felt they were grieving wrong, that they weren't getting it right, that they should be sort of doing this better. And that came from ignorance, because grief really is the last taboo, and we haven't found a way of talking about death, and therefore we haven't found a way of talking about grief. And I wanted to change that and give people some basic understandings so that there's much less fear around grieving and death, and that people can be more self-compassionate, but also deal with it with confidence. Because probably the single biggest predictor of a good outcome of grief is the support that you get at the time of the loss and following the loss. Because when love dies, when someone you love dies, it's finding love with others that helps you rebuild your life. And so I've told stories from my work with clients, 14 stories. And
amazing stories with real clients.
There was real
yours,
clients
yeah,
who were incredibly kind to give me permission. Some are composites, but most of them are one person.
Out of the stories that you've chosen, out of all of the cases that you've seen, why did you choose these specific stories? And you narrow it down a little bit to say the relationship of the person that has passed away. So, a sibling, a child, a parent.
Facing your own death.
Facing your own death, that's
and
a big
partner.
one. Yep, and a partner. But of those, I think that's 5. Of those, why did you choose these specific stories?
I chose those stories, some of them because they were in my current practice, and so I had live tapes that I could use, so that felt much more kind of present. But also because they represented what, over these years, I've learned from everybody is kind of normal in grief. And what your relationship is with the person that died has a big significance in how you grieve their death. So whether they're a sibling or whether they're a parent or a partner, or certainly a child, has a big impact. So I sort of wanted to show what most commonly happens in that particular kind of relationship. And the big thing that comes through, I think, I don't know if you saw this, through all the stories, is that there's no avoiding the pain of grief.
Yeah.
That it's the things that people do to avoid the grief that in the end do them more harm. So everyone is very individual and very unique from their upbringing, their personality, and all of those things. So there's no one person is at all similar, and yet there is this thread running through all the stories, is that they have to face the reality of the loss. They need to express their grief. And then that paradoxically frees them to begin to rebuild their life and live again and love again. And it's kind of the opposite of what society expects now. Now we kind of think, avoid the pain, have a quick fix, get the quick app, do everything and be smart about it. And avoid the difficulty, you know, smart grief.
Yeah.
And there isn't a smart grief. It really does have a course of its own and a natural process, and it's about being self-compassionate and supporting yourself through it rather than trying to wrestle it down like a monster that you're going to beat.
Yeah, or trying to ignore it as well. You said in one of the cases, I think it was, I believe it was that it took 18 months in total for, I'm trying to remember the woman's name, but 18 months for her to fully really like go through the entire process. Is that something that you would say is normal, or is this something that is not normal, or is that good? Because I think there's some people that live their entire life and they never really deal with the grief of losing someone close to them.
I think that's true. I mean, a client will always say to me, how long is this going to take? And my answer really annoys them, because I say it's probably longer than you want. And the measure of your loss is the emotional investment in the relationship. So however much you love someone, that is the measure of how much you miss them. So if it's your partner that has been an integral part of your life for 35 years and he dies suddenly, then of course, which is in one of the stories, not suddenly, he had cancer, that is going to affect every aspect of your identity, of your relationship as a parent, with your friends, and so that takes a long old time. But I think the worst of it is probably in the first year, and once you've done the first of everything, you know, the first Easter without the person, the first summer holidays, the first of their birthdays, the first of your birthday, all those significant days that you've normally done as a partnership or as a parent or a sibling, whatever. I think once you've got through the first one, then it is a little bit easier. But the circumstances makes a big difference. So if someone has a sudden death, if they die by suicide or have a road traffic accident or something completely unexpected, it's for regrets, because there's so many things you haven't said or organised or prepared for. And again, it's this thing, I think particularly 21st century kind of way of being is about not having control. And we want to have control 24/7. And there's nothing that lets us know that we're ultimately powerless than sudden and unexpected death.
Yeah.
You know, that flies in the face of all of our apps that we do in 10 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing that you can do at all to control it. And also it's so weird that we don't talk about it more, because it affects everyone. Like at some point in your life, or the person sitting next to you's life, death is going to affect them. Yeah.
And you know, one of the things I kind of think about is that we talk about all the significant things in our life, about having babies, marriage, jobs, work, and our own failures, lots of things, certainly sex much more than we ever used to. I don't think necessarily honestly, but certainly people talk about it much more. And we are silent on death. And I think there's a kind of magical thinking that if I don't think about it, if I don't talk about it, it's not really going to happen to me. It's like whispering.
Yeah.
You know, he's not going to come down and look at me, this magical God, if I don't mention it. So he's going to miss me out.
Yeah. But that's not how it works. It's like if you do this and you hold your tongue this way and you stand this way, then maybe you'll get to live a little bit longer, but it just doesn't work that way.
No, it's random.
Yeah.
It's really random.
Yeah.
You can be the fittest, healthiest, marathon running, vegan, water drinking hero, and you can get run over.
Yeah.
I don't mean to say that nastily, but you know, we can't avoid it. So my message in my book through all these stories is, please let's begin to have the conversations with the people that we love in our life, with our families, with our best friends, so that we do have more understanding and we do have more confidence when we have to face it, which, as you say, whatever we kind of think, we inevitably will.
Can I ask, how did you get started doing this? This is so
Weird.
It's not weird. It's just so
Niche.
you come from a very like very amazing background, a fantastic background. You've dedicated your life to talking about this and to helping other people through this, and it is like you went the exact opposite of what you could have done.
Maybe that's why.
I don't know. I think it's really incredible and so generous of you. It's a hard subject to take on, and you've managed to do it for like 30 years. So how did this come about?
I think it's a combination of things. My parents were survivors of the Second World War, and by the time my mother and father were in their mid-20s, my mother, her father, and her sister and her brother were dead.
Oh my gosh.
And my father, and his brother. And they never spoke about these people. So we had black and white photographs in our house, who I vaguely knew as my aunt or my grandparent, but there were no stories. I didn't know how they died. I didn't really know what they were like or who they were. And then when I was kind of in my 20s, my mum, and she was in her sort of late 60s, she talked to me about her brother Tony being killed in the war. He was killed at Arnhem. And she talked about it as if she was the 17-year-old schoolgirl, which she was, in Edinburgh, as if it happened yesterday. And she had this completely untouched grief that she'd done everything to avoid thinking and talking about. And that had used enormous psychological energy, which, you know, I love my mum, but as her, all of us could feel that. You know, there wasn't a lot that was spare, as it were. And it was true of my dad. And they were very much part of their generation who were taught what you don't think about and what you don't talk about isn't going to hurt you. You just have to get on. And that was their position post-war. They had no choice. It was a kind of primitive response, and it was a governmental response.
Yeah.
You know, keep calm and carry on.
Yeah.
And I think my generation, I'm nearly 60, have had the privilege and the luxury of not being threatened by war, although we've had lots of terrorism, and we have much more psychological understanding. So we kind of know what my parents never knew. They just didn't understand these things. So I think that was my childhood influence, and I think being a twin like you, I seek connection.
Yeah.
You know, that thing of being in utero and your little toes are pressed against each other and your noses are pressed against. I think I'm always looking for someone to press against me in some way. And they're like, back off. They're like, go away.
I totally get that, yeah.
And so I think I chose this because there is nothing more intimate than being in the privileged position of supporting someone who's really hurting. And they tell me things they would never tell members of their family. And I really do, it sounds kind of trite, but I really feel that I'm the one that gets the riches because those relationships are so enriching for me. And, you know, I've sat in my room, I've never traveled much, but I feel like I've traveled the world with all my different clients from, you know, different countries, refugees and doctors, and I feel like I've learned so much from just sitting in my chair.
Kind of like books.
Kind of like books, yeah.
So when you finished writing this book, and how long was the process, the writing process?
Well, strangely, I wrote it quite quickly, which I sometimes think people think I just slapped it off if I did it quickly, but I was obsessed. It was like a sort of addiction. My husband talked about it as my new boyfriend. Like I was constantly, I wake up in the morning, it was like bolt upright in my bed, and I took it with me everywhere. So I did it in about 6 months, the first draft. And what was amazing
You're
was
just waiting to be told.
those
Just
stories. They came pouring out of me, and it was so lovely. I didn't know I could remember the detail. There's a story of a woman called Caitlin whose mother had died, and I'd completely forgotten about her smelling her mother. She had a difficulty in grieving it and was beginning to be very bad-tempered and everything. She came to see me, and after a few months I asked her to bring mementos of her mum, and she brought a photograph of her mum and a brooch, and she had this scarf lying kind of innocently on her lap, and I asked her to tell me about her mum, and as she was telling me she picked up the scarf and she smelt it. And it was like everything poured out of her, the power of her mother's smell.
Wow.
So she'd used all her defences not to think about or feel about her mum, and that had frozen her. And she had, you know, being frozen is a very lonely feeling. You feel very isolated from the rest of the world, and it can get you very angry, and you try and do things to stop being isolated, but actually the only thing that helps is to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so from there, I only saw her for 2 sessions after that. But that was like 15 years ago, and her whole story just popped up in me like it was yesterday. So it was amazing.
It is amazing. We have some questions coming in, but I still have a few more just on that one. You kind of talk about heirlooms a little bit, or you know the scent when someone passes away. You smell their shirt or you smell their things. For me, like I wear my grandmother's bracelet, my grandfather's army tags, and like just I don't know why.
They're touchstones to memories.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
So they short circuit sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste are where we store most of our kind of embodied memories. And they're the ones that are most powerful in connecting us. And what I talk about in the book is that, you know, the person has died, but the relationship continues. You don't stop loving like your grandma. You don't stop loving them because they've died. And so finding ways through those touchstones, through that bracelet, through, did you say what was your grandfather's?
Army tags.
His army tags.
Yeah.
By touching them, it connects you with them. And it can be that kind of bittersweet, kind of gentleness, sadness that they're gone, but also a very warming sense of having them in you and connecting to them. And so what we kind of talk about now is continuing bonds, that the relationship continues. That you could talk to your grandma and say, am I bonkers doing this new idea of books of this show? And you'll listen to her answer, and she'll say yes or no.
Wait, but doesn't that mean you're crazy when you do that?
Well, I mean, everybody does it.
Yeah, I agree. I do it very much, all the time.
I think you're crazy if you think they're actually present.
Yeah.
I think, you know, if you lay a place for them at breakfast and you put out their special mug and you think at some point they're going to come and eat it with you, that's bordering, you know. But if you have them in your heart, where most people feel them, and they're part of you.
Yeah. It's a beautiful answer. All right, we have some questions here. Oh, this is a great one.
Does that mean great, difficult, or
no,
great?
No. Great as in, well, I'll let you decide.
Okay.
Chris says, is there any way to prepare for grieving when a loved one's death is expected?
Yes, is the short answer. And I think grief starts at the point of diagnosis. As soon as the person you love, you know they have a diagnosis that they're likely to die or they have a life-limited illness, your whole perception of them and their relationship is changed. But I think what is difficult is that people tend to want to go for the hope. So they say to the person that's ill, you know, the doctors are going to fix you, you're going to get better. And they kind of think, again, this magical thinking, a way of loving this person who's got this life-threatening diagnosis is by having hope for them and believing everything's going to be okay. And that if I actually talk about them dying, it's going to hasten their death and it's going to upset them. So then there's this co-protection that happens between you and the person that you love, where both of you are constantly thinking about the possibility of them dying or the person, me dying, and are frightened, but you don't connect and you don't talk about it. So one of the things that I say, I work a lot with dying children, is I say to them, what's your worry? What's on your mind? Because it's not directing them. And if they don't want to talk about it, they'll say nothing, absolute nothing, and they'll turn on a video or play. And that would be the same with someone that you love. But also I think even if they say they don't want to talk about it, I think you can actually do it as a subject, is that we hope that everything's going to be okay, but can we talk about things that if you get sicker or you get iller, what are the things that we need to be thinking about together? How can we help each other? What do we need to prepare for?
It's beautiful.
I hope that answers your question. If I saw you face to face, I'd probably give you more of an answer because I'd ask you what else.
Also, you do go through a scenario in the book where there's that. You do one where there's an immediate, unexpected death, and then there's one where her husband, or her, I was thinking the husband is dying of cancer.
Yeah, so there's Caitlin, her husband is dying.
Yeah.
And then there's the one at facing her own death where
Yes.
she's dying.
Yeah. So, I would recommend that. Laura Blaze asked.
I got her to sit with, she had a younger son, and I got her to sit with her siblings and his godparents and her husband, who refused to talk to her about her dying. And they sat around the kitchen table together, and she talked about what she wanted for his 18th, and she wrote him cards, and what she was worried about for the future for him, so that was what she was most worried about, and so she could kind of parent him into the future, even if she wasn't going to be present, which is really sad.
Yeah. I have a question for you, too. One time, so I went through this phase, and this book is actually helping through that, but where I was like worried about death all the time. And someone close to me said, it's like you're eating a meal and you're just worried about dessert. And I was like, no, because dessert's not guaranteed. Like, that's not fair. What is your, like, do you have any advice on that? I mean, you have a whole chapter on it as well, but yeah.
I think if you are worrying about death, you use more energy telling yourself you're mad, worrying about it, and listening to friends that tell you you're mad, worrying about it. And actually, you should start talking to people about it. Mm-hmm. And if you talk to them, it will calm down your fears. What we imagine and keeping it in our heads is limitless and much more frightening than what we actually face.
Yeah.
What we actually face has kind of parameters.
Yeah.
And also you get support. And it's like waking up in the night and having a problem at 4 a.m. It feels completely unmanageable.
Yeah.
You talk to a friend at 10 o'clock and you go, oh, right, no, that's fine. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So maybe there was stuff that was going on and you were frightened.
Definitely,
and it was unsettling. And, there's all kinds of loss. And any kind of loss can put us in touch with our own mortality because you can't kind of not connect them.
Hopefully you're connecting them at least, I would think. Okay, Laura Blaze, she says...
Hi, Laura.
She says, what would be the first piece of advice you'd give to someone who has recently lost someone close to them? Is there a first step?
I think acknowledge the loss. Don't try and fix it. So show up. Like, be present and be a good friend and say, I'm so sorry, and the name of whoever it is has died. That is really painful. And then ask them what they want. So don't try and come in with a kind of menu of, I'm going to fix you, I'm going to do this for you, I'm going to do that for you, I'm going to sort you out, and I'm going to take you on holiday, and I'm going to take you to the movies. But say to them, well, how can I help? What do you want? And often people just want you to sit with them and eat soup and let them cry. Or they may say, I really can't cope with my children right now. Can you take my children to the park? Or will you arrange something for me? I can't concentrate at the moment. Or I can't cook. I just, I'm too distracted. And so bring casserole, bring soup. So people, if you ask them, they do know what they need.
Okay. Mercedes says,
Hi, Mercedes.
when a close friend or loved one is going through the grieving process, is it better to give them space or to try to stick close to them physically and emotionally?
I think it's sort of somewhere in between. I think the previous answer of ask them what they need, what do they want? Do they want you to stick close or leave them in peace? And probably they do want a bit of both. They need time. There's this thing I talk about in the book of the paradox of grief, that on the one hand, you need to face the reality of it and allow yourself to feel the pain. But on the other hand, it's the last thing on earth that you want to do or feel you have the energy to do. And I think you can be present for either one of those aspects. Help them be distracted, like take them for a walk, or sit beside them and help them be sad. But ask them what they need. Does that answer that?
Mm-hmm. We have a question here from Kimberly. She says, working as a psychotherapist, has your career changed your perspective on life, and if so, how?
Kimberly, that's a good question. It has and it hasn't. So the kind of deeper, more side of me that I prefer has definitely changed my attitude to life, that I realise how precious life is, that I realise that the only thing that really matters is the people that you love, and everything else is kind of icing on the cake. But then there's a really shallow, ridiculous side of me that doesn't necessarily always take in what I really know, and I can be ridiculous. Yeah, so it's both. I'd like to be more of one, and sometimes the other.
Mercedes says, is it easier for someone to grieve if they are surrounded by their lost loved ones' belongings, or does the constant reminder have a negative effect? Would donating or getting rid of those belongings make it easier to move on, accept their death?
It's really individual, that. I mean, some people, I think particularly with a sudden death, but maybe any kind of death, they need the belongings, as we talked before, as a touchstone to their grief, and they need to hold on to them, and they become very, very important. They have the smell, and they feel like, grief is the Latin word for robbed, and they feel robbed again if someone comes in and starts wanting to give them to, the local charity. But there's 15% of all psychological disorders comes from unresolved grief. So there is a tipping point where if those things really overtake more of your life than feels, and you'll kind of instinctively know for yourself that feels balanced, then you need to kind of think about that and talk to somebody about that and understand what's going on. I mean, I'm seeing a woman now who had a stillbirth, and she still has the cradle and lots of aspects of the baby's things that she never got to use, and she isn't ready, and that was 4 years ago, and she's kept them in a cupboard, and I think over time she will get there. Somebody else with a different psychological makeup, with a different perspective, that might be very unhealthy. So it is very individual.
Interesting. Saruti says, hello from India.
Hi.
Hi, Saruti. Nope, I thought I said Siri.
Siri.
Joshua says, how can you cope with facing your own death?
I think it's difficult. I think it's very different facing your own death if you really know that you're going to die, as opposed to sort of existentially. And I'm assuming you're talking about facing your own death if you know you're going to die. And I think it's one of those things that you can't do it, you can only do it sort of incrementally in bite-sized chunks. But you really, the biggest thing that helps people face their own death is connection and the love of others, talking to people, and feeling close to them, and finding ways of dealing with the fear, because it's very frightening. And one of the most simple ways, if you're well enough to do this, is to take some kind of exercise, to get out and walk, to be in nature, choose to do things that calm you, and choose to do things that feel important to you. So I was working with a family where the mother was dying, and she couldn't in the end get out of bed, but her teenage sons came and sat on the bed with her, and they did their play, listened to music together, they had a playlist for her, they did drawing together, and they created memories, and she felt she was creating memories in them for when she had died, and that sort of soothed her. So, I mean, it is very different for different people, but...
Chris says, what was your daily process like writing the book?
I was obsessed, so it was all I thought about. I'd wake up very early, about 5, and I'd work for a couple of hours, and then I'd go for a run, or I kickbox, because a lot of people tell me really difficult stories, so I kickbox to punch some of the anger I feel out about it. And my kickboxing teacher can't believe how much, I'm quite short, how much I actually want to hurt him and how hard my punch is.
Fierce. Small but fierce.
Small but fierce. And then I would see clients, and then I'd work everywhere. I worked on the tube, I worked on the train, I worked at the weekends, and I basically, the thing that my editor said to me, just get it out. Do the shitty first version. Don't try and get it all right. I'm sure that's what lots of authors say, is just get the words on the page and then you can begin to shape it and give it its real nuance and richness, but get the story out. So I did that very quickly.
Okay, we have a few more questions here and then we'll start wrapping up. I'm going to go ahead and ask you a question that I've been wondering that has to do with your late and great friend, Princess Diana.
Yeah.
You guys were close, and I think now you're the godmother of William and Kate's son,
Prince George. Yeah.
Prince George, which is amazing and really cool. And I feel like you will have a great guiding spirit for him as he grows.
I hope so.
I'm sure.
She was my son's godmother, and she gave all the presents that as a parent you don't want, but all the presents your child does want. Really noisy, really big, like really interfering presents that she'd kind of arrive with. And so that's what I do with George. I bring him the presents that William will take ages to build and really drive himself mad. And they're really noisy and he loves them. Lots of banging and pooping. And
that's sweet.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's sweet. I know they think it's sweet. So I think something we spoke about before this is just, her death was so sudden. And I think the world really coped with that. And really, why do you think that she's still being mourned 20 years later?
I think, it was really sudden, and I still really miss her. I don't think that ever goes. I think there was something about being in that sort of public but quite romantic kind of dreamy position of being a princess, being very beautiful, but also really showing her true self, being really authentic and showing her vulnerability. People really felt they knew her, and she felt that they knew them, that she showed her things that she had difficulty with. And so they really built what felt like a real relationship to her. And I think really how you live on isn't with statues and buildings named after you, but how you live on in the hearts of people that survive you. Yeah. And I think she had that sort of her tiny little footprint left a very big, footprint in people's hearts.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think also the outpouring of loss at the time was, I think in some senses, when you really love someone. So I didn't cry to begin with at all. And I felt I couldn't understand why I went into the street. I lived very close to Kensington Palace. And I heard all this wailing and crying, and I felt so confused. Why did these people that never even met her, why were they crying? And I was like this stony, sort of old back, really. But actually, I think the more you love someone, the more defended you are. Yeah. And I think there was something about us in society now. There are very few things that get us to come together in the way that churches used to gather us together. Yeah. And I think now, like when David Bowie dies or Leonard Cohen, that thing of coming together, sitting vigil, crying with over someone that you have known, that's been the playlist to your life, or like with Dan has felt kind of like heartfelt, is a way of connecting that we don't have other opportunities to do. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I do. I think, I don't know, like I'm the kind of person that likes to grieve by myself, so like I'll write it down. And
journaling really helps.
Journaling and reading. Writing has helped me a lot.
It does help
through that. But I do think there's something to be said for, I go to church, so yeah. But you had mentioned there's digital funerals now. that is mind-blowing in itself, to think that can we get that.
And people go to the funeral on Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Virtually.
Virtually.
It's so crazy. But it's weird, like when my grandmother died, for example, which was 4 years ago today.
Oh gosh.
I know.
That's quite significant.
I
and
know.
Weird, isn't it?
It is weird. When she passed away, we were in New Orleans, and I remember throwing a rose on her casket as we lowered it. And you can't, to me, that was a really moment for me that I'll never forget. And you can't do that if you're,
Sitting in a sitting room somewhere.
Yeah, it just isn't the same. It's just not even close to the same to being there.
Because, the hardest task of mourning is facing the reality of the loss.
Yeah.
And there's no other reality as in your face as standing by a grave. What's it called? A hole in the ground. I should know all the words. Standing by a grave, yes, with a coffin in it, and throwing the rose in, because you have the smell, you have the sound, you have your feeling, you have everybody around you.
Yeah.
And that memory of that.
Yeah.
Is the sort of blast of reality that you can't not know that she died, because you were there and you buried her.
Yeah.
If you're not present at that, there's a whole lot of imagination that kind of lets you think she's still here in some way. And I think that's where you get some of the disorders of loss.
Yeah, I could see that. And then we have just one last question. Actually, we have a few in here, but I'll start wrapping it up. Lucy says, "Thank you for sharing your incredible work with us. It's truly inspiring."
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
Fuzia says, "What a lovely story. Thanks for sharing."
My pleasure, Fuzia.
We'll go to Roxanne's question that says, "How do you help someone that has mental disorders get past the death of a close friend?"
That really adds a big layer of complexity, because every layer of difficulty, of kind of psychological robustness and openness to the pain narrows your capacity to manage it. So I think helping them, because grief is so embodied, helping them physically is really helpful. But I think the big thing is it's really incremental. It's bite-sized chunks at a time. You can't give very much information. They can't take in very much information at once. So you really have to go much more slowly and kind of find a level of understanding that they can work with. And so it's a long, long process.
Great. Julia, you are a wealth of knowledge, and I highly recommend your book, Grief Works. It's just outstanding, the works the stories that you've put in here. They're beautiful, and I think for those of you who are mourning or who know someone who is in mourning, this is a great book to help them not feel so alone. Julia, how can our audience find you? You have a website?
I have a website, www.griefworks.co.uk. I'm on Amazon. I'm in all good bookshops. And that's all I know.
Are you on social media? Are you on Twitter?
I'm on Facebook.
Facebook, okay. All right, you guys. Julia, do you have any parting words?
I think look after yourselves if you're grieving, and find people to help you, and be self-compassionate. And thank you for listening.
Perfect.
Thank you for interviewing me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And thank you guys.
Bye.